Peace and long life, Doctor.
Live long and prosper.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of Starfleet Boy, in which we have a casual and informal conversation.
And logical.
And logical today, yes. And a logical conversation about Star Trek The Next Generation. And today's episode, I would consider this a very special episode of Starfleet Boy because today's episode is Sarek. Sarek, and there he is. So tell us about that figurine.
Oh, it's from the collection, Playmates. It came out probably in the 90s.
Have you had that figure that long, or is that one of your newer pieces?
This is it's one of the newer pieces.
Nice.
That I've acquired due to your show here. It's your fault.
The burden I've placed upon you.
Yeah. Although Sarek is probably a figure I would have wanted to have collected anyhow. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know why I never bought him. Maybe he just wasn't widely available.
There was that problem. I remember there were a couple times where I would go. I was never the one waiting in line at or hunting them down, but I remember Sarek was a scarce commodity even on that run.
Okay, yeah, maybe that's why. But I happened to there was somebody who was selling like a bunch of them carded, and I said, yeah, here we go. Here's the money. Let me have them. And I opened them all up, and I think the guy was horrified that I was opening them up.
Yes, I had many arguments with some of my friends who kept their toys in their boxes, although I might be guilty of that nowadays.
I have a few that I keep in the box, but most of the stuff But anyway, enough about that.
Why don't we go straight to this awesome episode?
Yeah.
Sarek, I guess we'll go right to the summary, which we'll do together. Shall we do this summary together, Captain? Shall we mind meld? Shall we join minds and conduct the summary together? That's such a terrible Sarek. I'm so sorry. Mark Leonard has such a great voice. Okay.
Yeah.
So the episode is titled Sarek, and it opens with Captain Picard rather thrilled or excited to be hosting a conference, a meeting between what were they called, the Lagarens?
The Lagarens,
yes. And basically, Sarek has been working on having a meeting with the Lagarens
for many decades,
90 years, I think, 90 plus. And so this is supposed to be the greatest moment of his career. One of the greatest figures.
One of the greatest moments, yeah. It's the culmination. I think it's being looked at as the culmination of his career is to finally bring the Lagarens to the Federation.
Mm-hmm.
Have you looked them up, by the way, what they look like?
No.
You should.
All right, we'll check it out during the show. You have to remind me.
Yeah.
Anyways, Picard's very excited to meet Sarek, and to his surprise, however, Sarek is not what he expected. An odd circumstance where his attaches beam ahead of him and give these kinds of disclaimers and warnings and saying that the ambassador, needs to be in seclusion and he doesn't want to be disturbed, et cetera, et cetera. And then he meets Sarek, and there's a slight moment where it appears that Sarek is actually annoyed and or even a little upset and angry, and it's very confusing to the captain. And the episode we're kind of getting more and more hints that something's not quite right with Sarek, and in addition to that, the condition he has is causing emotional outbursts among several members of the crew,
including one of the best Geordi Wesley scenes of all time.
Oh yeah. And also, just a lot of anger is being sort of beamed around the ship, if you will. And finally, it comes to a head where Captain Picard realizes that he must confront the ambassador and let him know that he doesn't think he's fit to conduct the negotiations, and that the negotiations should, in fact, be either delayed or possibly, dealt with someone else. This is completely unacceptable to Sarek, and unfortunately, it causes Picard to push him over the edge in a gripping scene where Mark Leonard looks like he's, so like it was great. Anyways, it comes to a head, and then finally Sarek and his new wife Perrin decide that maybe there is a way, and so the captain and Sarek mind meld, and Captain Picard takes all the negative aspects of this condition, the outbursts of emotions, the intense feelings, while Sarek is able to conduct the negotiations free of that and fully himself. And that's the episode. Picard goes through it. He of course has Beverly. I see her there. He goes through it, and we get some interesting insights on Sarek himself. And at the end of the mission, the two somewhat fondly, I think, and say goodbye to each other. And we get a very fascinating little follow-up to a great character in Star Trek pantheon, and we have a kind of just new insight into like Vulcans as well with Bendai syndrome. That's it. That was a terrible summary, wasn't it?
No. It was great.
All right.
It cut through the fat.
Now let's explore the fat.
Exactly.
What'd you think?
I think we've been very excited about talking about this episode for a while, and I think part of the reason is Sarek. Even he only appeared in a couple episodes he only appeared in one episode in the original series, and one episode in the animated series. But I think fans our age really built up a dedication to Sarek because of the movies. Mm-hmm. Mark Leonard did such an amazing job when he came back to the role and essayed it in Star Trek 3 and 4. We've seen 3 and 4 up to this point now. And
he's in Star Trek 6, so he even finishes
with
the crew.
Right. But at this point, at the airing of Sarek, we'd only seen him up to 3 and 4, and he just brings, he's on screen briefly, but he just manages to just command the screen in those small scenes that he's in, and it's just a gravitas that actor brought to the role, and it's really compelling. And I just can't imagine, and I have yet to imagine any other actor who can play Sarek. I mean, who else can be Leonard Nimoy's father other than Mark Leonard as Sarek?
And funny thing on the commentary for Star Trek 4, which when I watched that, with a little side note here, when we watched the commentary together many years ago, I could have sworn it was just Leonard Nimoy, but when I listened to it again more recently, it's Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner. Was that always the case? And I just somehow
it was
transmuted
they're
it.
edited in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one of those commentaries.
But they both remark about Mark Leonard and what an amazing performer, actor he is, and he really is. He's had an illustrious career and a lot of Shakespeare, and you could just totally tell because he has that kind of pedigree. And that was actually one of the most delightful things about this episode, was watching our two Shakespearean legends here, Patrick Stewart, who is also very well known for his brilliant interpretations of Shakespeare as an actor. It's just like to me, it was one of those episodes that is not only compelling in terms of the story, the writers did get it right in my opinion, but regardless of what they were talking about, just watching the performances in this episode was delightful for me. So yeah. But going back to that scene in Star Trek 4 in the commentary, both William Shatner and Nimoy have this delightful moment, and they're like, it is remarkable how much resemblance there is between Leonard Nimoy and Mark Leonard.
Yeah, right.
Like they do look like father and son. It's very convincing.
It truly is. It really is.
Picard
Yeah.
mentions that he was at Sarek's son's wedding, and they don't say Spock, but as far as I know, there's just Spock and Sybok's gone. So is that what's? Do you know anything about this? Like,
Well,
is
I mean,
there
I think
other
at the
references?
time, I think there may have been there, and I don't know if this is in the comics or in the books, but there may have been something about Spock and Savick.
Right. Okay, we've talked about that before. That's
Right,
right.
but
Yeah.
I think this is just sort of the series just trying to be, well, we can't really go into it because if a later movie contradicts it, then we're screwed. So
Right, because they were playing it at a very kind of interesting time where the two generations were playing at the same time.
right, exactly, yeah, yeah. So, but going back to the actor Mark Leonard, he was a stage act along, he had a lot of stage roles, and I remember he did stage work with Walter Koenig.
Oh,
I forget what play, but
let's use our internets here while you.
he's so he is one of those actors that you he brings something of the quality that you see in a lot of English actors. When the fact that English actors do stage, they do television, they do movies, and they have a lot of they just know how to command the screen and very well for the most part. And Mark Leonard definitely had that. And now, of course, this episode is really the first time that we saw McCoy in the pilot, but we didn't really know much. We didn't have much context as to what is he doing, why is he even there, other than to review the medical quarters or whatever,
Right.
the med bay or whatever on the Enterprise. But we didn't have much context for what is McCoy up to and what is the rest of the crew up to.
Yeah, I think, and I don't recall now. I wish I had a memory like this, but it was something like they were probably transporting him from one base to another, from one planet
No,
to another.
no, he
It
was
was
there specifically to
just to send
review.
her off. Okay, got it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and then he goes over to the hood. But, Sarek, just the episode, represents the first time that Next Generation really delved deep into a character that we hadn't seen since the original show, which
Right.
I think shows that the series was beginning to grow bolder and more confident in its storytelling. That we were learned more about Klingons, little bit more about Romulans, but now here we go full into Sarek, one of the most well loved characters from the original show, and it added a lot of depth to that character, and it's actually a very sad episode to watch. I
It
mean,
is very sad. Yeah.
it's a very powerful and sad episode.
It's also something that many of us personally deal with our elders, with our age, as our elders begin to age. Some of them start to experience basically Bendai syndrome, but it has other names than like dementia or Alzheimer's, or whatnot. And there's that really lovely kind of moment where Picard and Riker and Data are talking about it actually, and Picard's remarking about how, time just. This is actually kind of interesting because later we see his views, on time being more like a companion, but here he still kind of sees the ravages of time taking their toll on you, and he sees it as like, that's the one thing that humans, with all our technology, can't seem to stave off. And mind you, in the next generation, humans have like incredibly longer lives and medical, much more comfortable lives than what we imagine. What, things that we can't even imagine at this moment. Like, right now it's a record if you live into your early hundreds. So
Right.
and very rare. But I would say that, and then I liked that even Data has a sense of mortality, because he even mentions that it's possible for it would be, of course, over a much longer period of time, but even his own hardware could eventually fail and start to, so it's a really cool concept, and I think they handle it really well, because you're taking an iconic character and really giving him a story here that is sad, like you said, and it could have been handled in a way that made it infeasible to us as fans. Like, that can't be the fate of Sarek of Vulcan. But here you actually do accept it, and again, obviously because Mark Leonard is insanely great as an actor, and he just sells it beautifully. Like, it's just, you trust Mark Leonard to be Sarek. Like, I think in some situations, an actor just owns a role so well.
Yeah.
And I think in this situation, you're like, well, if Mark Leonard is doing this great a job at performing these words, then that is Sarek. That is who he is. That is his story, and it's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, we're so used to seeing Sarek a certain way, and then his performance is lots of nuances of when he's losing the control, and emotion is creeping in, and like as you alluded to in the summary, that Khan is really going crazy.
I know, we're having quite a day today.
That scene where him and Picard
mind meld.
Well, no, before the mind meld, when Picard is confronting Sarek.
Oh, right, correct.
And
Picard,
you see the anger just
but it's
boiling within him, and it's a battle of logic and wits, and Picard is trying his best, and what's great is how the episode very quickly in the beginning establishes how much admiration and respect that Picard has for this man, right from the beginning. Right. And for him to have to go and tell Sarek that, you may be endangering the mission. I mean, that's intense.
and then that scene is great, because he has to really he has to push Sarek for Sarek to realize what's happening to himself, because all this time, Amanda and
not Amanda.
I'm sorry,
Perrin,
and we have to talk about this.
We do.
Yeah. Perrin and Mr. Mendoza and the young Vulcan protege have been keeping this condition at bay, and it's been easy for even Sarek not to understand what's happening to him. And I do love that scene where and this scene is a pretty long scene, because it starts with Picard coming to Perrin and telling her he needs to speak with the ambassador, and then the ambassador walks in, Sarek walks in, and he's like, if Picard wishes to see me, he may. It's just like a very by the way, that's the other thing that's so cool about Sarek, is how noble he comes across. Mark Leonard, again, what you said earlier about the gravitas, it's like he's able to just be like,
he conveys it so naturally. Yeah.
So naturally, it's just so wonderful. Okay, anyways, but then it starts there in that little scene where his crew basically won't respond, and then finally the protege admits to it, and then Sarek's like, well, this has to stop immediately, and he's like, it would be unwise, and he says, it would be unwise, but it is necessary. And it's so great, because it's a moment where you realize, like, you know, Sarek st- is still a logical and sensible being, and he seems so like disappointed but like understanding at that moment too. He's like, I can't believe my trusted and most close people have been doing this behind my back, but he realizes why they were doing it too. So it's very complex what's happening there. It's beautifully played out. Great scene. And then we switch to the scene where it's just Picard and Sarek alone. And when Picard just like pushes him, he's like, Sarek of Vulcan would not do this. Sarek of Vulcan would not be this way. And Sarek, and then you just see Mark Leonard like he can't take it anymore, and he just like gives that wonderful like emotional outburst and even shakes. It's like I was scared. I was like oh my gosh,
Yeah.
you know, is Mark Leonard gonna have a heart attack? Like, you know,
Yeah.
it was a very intense performance.
It was.
And it kind of, you know, now I think about it, and it's like there are echoes of like this kind of thing with the in the Kelvin the Kelvin movie, when basically that's what Kirk has to do to Spock to make him realize that he is in fact emotionally compromised in the situation, and he's not making decisions correct. Like, you know, and it's kind of a similar type of vibe there, where Kirk has to push Spock to the edge.
I didn't need that detour into the Kelvin universe.
Oh my gosh. It's another universe. Don't worry.
It is another universe.
It's well established that it's another universe.
Yeah. I mean, to talk about Perrin now, I still remember the shock at seeing Sarek had married another.
I was fully outraged and upset when I was younger.
It was like I'm going to compare it to when Hume Cronin
yes
started dating somebody after Jessica Tandy.
I know.
Her passing. I was like, what the fuck? You know?
Yeah, it did not. My
the body's not even cold, man.
Yeah.
Hume Cronin.
Do you think it's out of character now though, as a older person? Do you think that what do you think?
You know, it's funny. I was thinking about it actually last night because I went to see Paul McCartney, and and he sings a song for his current wife, who was there in the audience, and he says, "Oh, this is for my current. This is for my wife. I forget what her name is, Nancy or something. I don't know." And we're like, you know, as like collectively, you can kind of feel like people are still like, "Who the hell's Nancy? Oh, Nancy. Oh, okay, all right." And he sings a song.
Think of Linda, because you think of Linda.
Right. So you're like,
so
Linda McCartney passed away like a long time ago.
Yeah.
But still, you know, you just associate him so much with Linda McCartney, and he you know, he sings a really pretty song actually. It's called "My Valentine" for her, and then he goes into, you know, "Baby, I'm Amazed," and he mentions Linda, and the whole arena just like, oh, you know, and yeah, there are just certain situations like that where as an audience you connect to certain couples, and certainly Amanda and Sarek is the Star Trek equivalent of that, I guess.
I guess so. It's a really good point. Although not his first wife either, because apparently there was a Vulcan princess that he mated with.
Well, he mated, but they didn't necessarily marry.
We don't know the full story of Sarek, as far as I mean, I don't know the full story of Sarek.
I do.
Okay, let's.
I read. There's a novel called Sarek, which I felt compelled to read before leading up to this.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I recommend it highly. It's a very interesting novel.
Was it a Next Generation era novel?
No, it actually takes place. It takes place A week and a half after Star Trek 6. Let me tell you, that ending, that ending, a lot happens between Spock saying, "Go to hell," and them actually returning back to Starfleet and
Wow.
decommissioning. A lot happens because there's at least 3 novels that I've read that take place after Star Trek 6.
Wow, okay.
And Sarek apparently is one of them. But there's a lot of flashbacks and actually deals with the death of Amanda. And it's really rather poignant. And Sarek.
Hang on though, but
Uh-huh.
so is it then implied that Amanda dies somewhere between Star Trek 4 and Star Trek 6? Is that what the case
Yes,
is? Oh,
absolutely.
okay.
Yes.
Hmm.
She dies after Star Trek 6.
Right after.
Yes,
Oh, wow, okay.
exactly. So she is ill, and then Sarek is forced to go on a mission, and Sarek leaves Amanda's side,
Oh
and
no.
Spock is greatly upset by this. Spock is with Amanda when she finally passes away, and he is so it rekindles the anger because I mean this is the thing about the episode Sarek that always kind of not confused me, but I always just felt well there's more to this because Star Trek 4 features almost like a reconciliation, which feels a long time coming because it's from the original series all the way to Star Trek 4. We finally have father and son coming together and understanding each other more and all that and forgiveness and all that.
Mhm.
But then when we get to the episode Sarek and Next Generation, we realize that they're estranged again. And you're like, well, shit, what happened? What happened
Right.
this time?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's obvious that Spock doesn't get along with Perrin, and Spock apparently harbors ill feelings because Sarek wasn't there with
Wait, so
Amanda.
in the novel, Sarek starts at the end of Star Trek 6, and it goes on through the Next Generation. Is that what you're telling me?
No,
No.
no, no.
Oh, okay.
It kind of jumps around in time, but the main storyline deals with Sarek. It's actually kind of a kooky plot. He learns that there's this race that he's been negotiating with for a long time, and they've been negotiating to enter the Federation for many, many years. And it turns out that this entire race is a Romulan plot. They're actually Romulans, and
Of course,
they've never been
Romulans.
seen.
Of course,
It's
the
one of
Romulans. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
it's amazing when it's like kind of like Battlestar Galactica. Like nobody had seen them, and suddenly they show up. And like, wait a minute, what? This is what Cylons are. Um, it's the same scenario. And what's interesting is that Sarek always kind of suspected, and it's only because when he first dealt with this race, he was going through Ponfar. Ponfar with Cybox.
Princess.
Like he was, yes, but he was far away. So he actually, like, it was so strong that he collapsed. like he was just going insane, and in his hysteria, he imagined that he saw Romulans, but he was never sure because he was in the throes of Ponfar, so he was never really sure of what that was. All he knows is that eventually he made it back to Vulcan, and Cybok happened.
Holy moly, Ponfar sounds intense.
Apparently. Well,
Wow.
yeah. He was like completely just like incapacitated by it. And suffice to say, this is a really great novel, and it's a must read. But getting back to the episode, Sarek, I think it's interesting that Perrin is so. I really like the relationship that they had. You know, she was very protective of him, and she had she had some great scenes with Picard, and a lot of this pays off later on in Unification, which of course is a not a sequel, but it picks up threads that are laid down here. I mean, you almost can't. I mean, if you watch Sarek, you have to watch Unification. They're part of the same story almost.
Right. No, absolutely. No, I think they are actually. And if I'm not mistaken, again, vague memories of things like, so, yeah, at this age, you get so much stuff in your head. You don't know what's what was when always. It's not readily available. But I do recall like these, especially on VHS, you would get these box sets that had different themes. And I think one of them was like the Spock, Sarek, this whole like thing that goes on for, that is addressed in a few episodes, and you can kind of watch them one after the other, and like it's easy to see them as a continuation of one another.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I have the Blu-ray of Unification, and I really wish it had brought as a bonus Sarek, because you almost connected, you need that. It's almost like Rogue One now, the way it's connected to New Hope.
Yeah, it's true.
You can't watch one without the other now,
Yeah, they've really lovely how that happens when you have a great episode like this.
Like this, yeah.
Because it does become part of a larger story. Wow, very cool. I did not know about all that stuff. Well, I like Perrin too, actually. I didn't mind her this time around. I think I understand, because now I've seen, probably back then in high school, I was so opposed to it, because in many ways, you see some of these characters as your own parent. You see parts of your own parents in them, and I definitely would have been upset if my father,
yeah, of course, yeah, it's natural.
Would have.
She's a stepmom.
Yeah, exactly. She's basically a stepmom, and we all relate through Spock, so it's kind of a natural thing. But now in watching it again, I didn't mind her at all, and I thought she was, like you said, I thought the actress did a great job at her performance, of course, and then it's very convincing that both of them, there's a bond, there's a love between them. And you know what? I don't think Amanda would have wanted Sarek to live alone after her death. And that's an interesting thing too. It's like, Vulcans have, do you know what the Vulcan lifespan is? He's in his 200s and he's starting to show signs of aging. So do they go into their 250s or 300s maybe?
I don't know. I would guess so, but I'm really not sure. I mean, obviously the Bendai syndrome is not natural. I mean, it's sort of it's a rare condition. So it's conceivable that he could have been that old and still been, in full faculties. So yeah, I mean, who knows? I'm not really. I'm unsure of how long they live. Spock seemed to live for almost forever.
Yeah. Well, apparently, it looks like, just a cursory glance here on the internet, that around 200. So Sarek's definitely quite aged as a Vulcan. Yeah, interesting, fascinating.
Now the Bendai syndrome, of course, has repercussions around the ship, which in kind of counterweight to the very dramatic, and in some cases sad and tragic plot of Sarek, and going through this syndrome. You have the crew bickering and fighting, and I have to admit, it's kind of humorous. I mean, when Geordi and Wesley just kind of, I mean, it starts off really small, but yet so true. Like, Geordi's like, why even going out with that girl? You're not, basically saying you're a freaking loser with women. And then I think Wesley says, like, well, at least I don't go into the holodeck looking for mine.
Yeah,
and you're like,
at least I don't have. God. He says I don't have to find my women on the holodeck. That was actually a really good.
Yeah.
And actually, now this is the third reference to Geordi's holodeck romance that we've
Because
gotten.
Barkley, he mentioned it to
Yeah,
Barkley,
yeah. So
right?
since season 3, we're getting quite a few references to this.
I wouldn't have. Yeah, I. How did that even get around? I mean, I thought, did Picard blab?
I think it's so far. I think it's just something that Jordy probably like
He
told a
actually
few.
owned up to it.
He
Wow.
might have owned up to it. I mean, he says to Barkley in the one scene, he says, believe me. I mean, like I know what it's like. I think he actually says like something like I
I
fell in
fell in
love
love in the
on
holodeck.
the
Yeah,
holodeck. So
yeah,
he's recouping from this experience, and it's pretty. Yeah, it's a pretty deep cut there from Ensign Crusher. Um, yeah, and then it was actually cool to see a bar brawl, so to speak. And
at
of
10
course,
forward, that was awesome.
yeah, I don't know if it was, too cheesy that Chief O'Brien is the star. He starts it.
No, I don't think so. I think it's perfect. It
I like
felt
that. Yeah.
like an old episode of Star Trek.
It did feel like an old episode of Star Trek. And in many ways that's actually a great to bring some elements from the original series into an episode about a character from the original series, So
Yeah,
kudos again to the team of writers that did this. I really love the scene, the performance. There's this like nice little, not the episode's actually, I guess, a bottle episode if you think about it, right? Like, we don't really see any other planets or locations. It all takes place
no,
on the ship,
yeah,
but
you
it's
just see that set where the Lagarens are going to be
right. Which
barging about.
I've looked real quickly and I couldn't find a picture of them. So you might have to be the
Can I share?
yeah. If you use that, remember we've done this before. So if you on the
I
left
don't
side, there's
remember.
the little green screen with an arrow.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah. Okay.
You press
Okay.
that, and it gives you a few options to go window or screen. You choose the window that it's on,
Oh.
and then
Okay.
you have to present to everyone.
All right. Well, then let
See if it
us.
works. Oh, the doctor's navigating today. I like this. But anyways, while you look that up, the scene in 10 forward, not well, yeah, 10 forward when they're having the musical performance and Sarek ends up showing up after Picard, has that nice moment where he kind of goes and asks Perrin if she'll consider coming. A couple things that I loved about that, at the time it mentions
Did you see
Joshua.
that?
Oh yeah, now you got to hit present to everyone, which is
Oh,
at the
that I
top
know.
of your screen. There you go. Oh no, you got to hit. Nope, now you're showing me.
Oh, okay. Let me go back.
All right. Up at the top of your Google Hangout
Mm-hmm.
screen, there should be a little green thing that says present to everyone. It doesn't say that.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, okay. Well, let's go ahead and keep talking while we look at it.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's an artist that I believe that's from a comic book because the Lagarens show up in a comic book apparently in one of the DC comics. So
Really cool.
yeah.
They look like a
Okay.
Komodo dragon, sort of.
Yeah, they do. All right. I've stopped sharing, right?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Anyways, of course, that scene's important because Sarek cries in that scene. But one thing that I liked is that Data mentions, like he did in the holodeck where he was emulating Kenneth Branagh's performance. He mentions two contemporary violinists, Joshua Heifetz and Yehudi Menuhin, among others that I didn't recognize. But I thought that was a little delightful thing to hear the names of, at the time, well-renowned and still today, solo violinist performers.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, very cool little thing. I know you're
Very
like,
classy.
huh?
Very classy.
Very classy. Of course, we know that they use classical music because it's part of the public domain, much of it. So it's okay.
I will refrain from going on my tirade about why is there no Chuck Berry on Star Trek, but
Hey, they fix it in Star Trek. We'll have to talk about not Chuck Berry, but
Roy
First
Orbison.
Contact. Yep. Um, let's see. Oh, I love that scene. What did you think of so um the attaché Mendozan? He's a human.
Yeah, yeah. I think it shows. You know, Sarek, for all his uh, uh, all the accusations that he launches at Spock, it was like, you know, why are you in Starfleet? All this, you know, why didn't you stay on Vulcan? Sarek does have seems to have an affinity for human beings. I mean, certainly his wives have mostly been human, but then there's also, you know, this character, who you know, is privy to something that is extremely private. So it's interesting that he's got a Vulcan and a human sort of running.
But what I found interesting was how Vulcan, the performance Mendozan was giving was. And it's an interesting thing. I mean, like, it's kind of natural when a human spends enough time around Vulcans, they'll probably start to emulate or adopt Vulcan philosophy and Vulcan way of life. And so I know we're waiting, and you know we're all waiting to see what Discovery is going to be like. But I think that's
going that way.
Yeah, well, I do. I think that's fascinating, and I wonder if because I do. That is one thing in the unfortunate trailers that I did detect is that the character Michael Burnham there does seem to be a Vulcanness to her, and so I'm curious now. I'm very curious actually to see how that translates into the actual show. What do you think about just, if you don't mind, let's have a little Star Trek Discovery moment here, and a little bit more. Sarek is a character that we love and has resonated, and he's made it now into several incarnations of Star Trek. This is the first time we see him, obviously, outside of the original series, Star Trek: The Next Generation. And unfortunately, because of Mark Leonard's passing, we don't see him again, but we do see the character again in the Kelvin universe. And I thought that was an acceptable performance. You just can't, there's no performance in my mind that can ever succeed Mark Leonard's. Mark Leonard is the definitive Sarek, and everyone else, I'm sorry. You're doing a great job and you're doing yeoman's work, but it's just, you're not Mark Leonard. You can never realize Sarek, in my opinion, in my personal opinion. And if you could, I'd be very impressed, because in my mind, that's a tall order. But anyways, that being said, it was acceptable performance because it was so small. It was a limited performance, and I like that. And now we're going to have Sarek again. And so this time, though, I love the actor who's playing him, but I'm not seeing Sarek. So maybe I just have to.
You got to watch it.
Watch it.
We got to watch it. We got to watch it. Back to Mendelsohn. You were saying that, you know, he was very Vulcan in his there's a novel, you know, there's different levels of non-canon, and the William Shatner Star Trek novels, I think, occupy a special level of non-canon in Star Trek.
No, the William Shatner's novels are they're canon. They're all canon. They're just canon.
I love them, but what can I say? Mendelsohn shows up and he's mentioned in one of them, and I believe Spock himself says that he's a human who has sort of, you know, adopted the ways of Vulcans, the teachings of Sarek. So yeah. So, you know, I mean, so this woman, the one who's going to be the first officer, is going to be
Sonequa, right?
Right. I mean, she's someone who obviously is a human who is making.
Oh wait, the character's name is Michael. The actress is Sonequa Martin.
Oh, okay. Well,
the character Michael, which I think is cool, she has a man's, what we think of as a man's name.
Right. Well, she is, and they're saying she's the first human to attend the Vulcan Science Academy.
Mm-hmm. Is that right?
That's what I've read.
Oh, okay.
And which would explain a close relationship between her and Sarek, because apparently Sarek is a sponsor. So, you know, this show might, even though I believe it's a different, you know, it's a fresh start for Star Trek, it might color in some insight into Sarek and his views on humanity, and you know, his affinity for humans.
He's in the trailer. He does seem harsh on her too, though, so that's intriguing as well. So yeah, there's a few things that we'll have to wait and see.
Right, right.
Which yeah, Star Trek Discovery is not far away. It's a few months away, so we're almost there. Um, but I do like that Sarek is so. My original point with this, I think, was somewhere along the lines of I do like that Sarek is this kind of like thread throughout all these different incarnations of Star Trek, and it's why do you think the character is so compelling, and or at least if you would share your feelings, your personal feelings as to what is it about Sarek ultimately that you think allows him to be a character that's important enough to resonate in the minds of the writers of both the Kelvin series and now Star Trek Discovery?
Well, two things. I mean, one, just from a story point of view, Sarek is an important element to Spock's origin. Because, I mean, if you don't have, you know, in whatever iteration you're going to have of Star Trek, if you're going to have Spock, you've got to have the rebellion against the father figure, and that therein you have Sarek. Of course, in the Kelvin universe, I mean, you know, obviously it's because we've only had 3 movies, but you know, we've really only had a Sarek with respect to that plot point, which is that he has to be in it in order for Spock to rebel against. With the original universe, we had a lot more material. We had a lot more instances of Sarek. I mean, we saw Sarek, you know, pretty much become almost like a, I don't know, this figure that successive Starfleet or Federation presidents would always, you know, seek advice from. You know, I mean, he just became this larger than life figure in the Federation.
And he even and that relationship actually, like, it seems like it continues into Enterprise, where the Vulcans themselves take on Sarah kind of embodies this idea that the Vulcans. Oh.
In Enterprise, the Vulcans and the humans are quite combative.
Right, so. But what I mean to say is that father-son rebellion that we see from Spock and Sarek, it's kind of more like the humans and the Vulcans in Enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think it's because, well, in many ways, as much as we love Spock, you think of when you meet Sarek in the original series, you're like, oh shit, like that guy's like badass. You know, like well, Spock's pretty cool and logical and emotional and accomplished and like impressive, but then you meet his father, who like he's kind of in the shadow of, in many ways, you know. And even in this episode, they say that, you know, you're accusing the greatest man of his time of losing his mind on the eve of his greatest triumph, and you cannot explain why. Mendoza poses that question to Picard, and so, like, you know, that kind of establishes in that one line Sarek's prominence in the Federation and in the success of the Federation itself.
Yes, absolutely. And again, that, I mean, you know, you're talking about the impression he makes in Journey to Babel. I mean, that all comes again. We go back to the actor. It's the actor, man. I mean, it's just he really embodied that role well, and it's very hard to recast and to find somebody. I mean, we see it all the time. Look at Doctor Who. I mean, we could say that, you know, some are less successful than others, because it's very hard to follow in the footsteps of someone who's so good. I mean, James Bond's, you know, I mean, I know people who refuse to watch Daniel Craig because they say, yeah, no
Oh
way. That
my.
guy's, there's people who don't watch Roger Moore because like, oh, they can't even compare to Sean Connery. So I think Mark Leonard is I mean, we're obviously going to have multiple Sareks. He's the original, and he's the best. I mean, he's the Sean Connery of Sareks, I guess.
Do you think that like when an actor performs a role so well, was there ever was it? I mean, I guess I don't know. It's a tough question, but do you retire the uniform, so to speak? Do you retire the character and when you get a performance that's so amazing? But then we'd never have another Sherlock Holmes series because, as far as I'm concerned, Jeremy Brett finished it.
Right, exactly.
But that's just, I guess, my own personal persona is that I feel like this sort of like fierce attachment when to an actor's performance. There's something about like when an actor becomes the character, and I feel like this is in the case of Sarek. For me, it's hard to validate other Sarek performances after the intimacy that I have with and the love that I have for the Mark Leonard performance. So yeah, it's a tough one for me.
I'm thinking right now, oddly enough, Desmond Llewellyn is Q, who played that part for like through almost 20 films, I think, and like 5 different Bonds. And then when he finally passed away, there was like this big question mark of what do we do? I mean, they were kind of like, they kind of had John Cleese there as R, and to kind of like take over, but it never really clicked that well. And then,
but you'll notice they retired Q. He was R.
No, right. But then when they rebooted it, they brought back, and they waited a few movies before they introduced a new Q. So I mean, yeah, you do have certain actors that just command. And
I guess you're right, and I guess to that respect, enough time has gone by. I mean, like Sarek the character deserves to live on, and so yeah, I think that's important.
Now we've spoken a lot about Sarek, but the other it's the other guy we got to talk about is Patrick Stewart, who rises to the occasion. The last episode I was saying how everybody was just sort of on autopilot. We can't accuse anybody of being on autopilot in this episode. And even though this episode is really about Sarek, it's a Picard episode in many ways. It's Picard coming to finally meet. Well, he briefly met him, but to sort of reconnect with somebody whom he admired for so long, and to participate on a mission with him. And then
he had this like awesome kind of idea that as captain he would have the privilege of like having a few conversations with Sarek, and dining with him, and perhaps even getting some insights or anecdotes or things like that. And it was he really laments that he couldn't have that relationship, but then he ends up getting something much deeper.
Oh yeah.
And even Sarek warns him. He's like, mind melds are he says something like terrifyingly intimate or horrifyingly intimate. Yeah. Let's talk about that for a moment. Now, Sarek mind melded with Kirk. So does that mean now that Picard sort of has been upgraded with the memories of not just Sarek, but also of Captain Kirk?
I think there's different forms of mind meld. No, because Sarek left nothing of himself in Kirk. I think this mind meld, he's obviously transferring. He's able to transfer, which is sort of interesting, extraordinary. Yeah. He's able to transfer this emotional torment that he has into Picard. And then, I think some of the most powerful moments of the episode are Picard with Crusher, at his side, enduring this emotional maelstrom for someone else. I mean, it's a mind-boggling concept when you think about it.
Well,
You know,
he chose the danger.
right.
I
It's
would-
extraordinary. It's an extraordinary
yeah.
sacrifice, and it's interesting because you know, sometimes you watch an episode and you're like, well, but why does it have to be that character? Who else but Picard could have done that? I mean,
That's
he
true.
not only is he doing it because he feels a special admiration for Sarek, but he's doing it also because he's the captain. He, he's the one that's got to do it,
He has to. He's
and
the only one who
he
can
has
do
to,
it. Yeah.
yeah. And I just I really felt those scenes were very, very powerful, and then, you know, just knowing that you know, of all the people that he chose, you know, Crusher is the one who's there by his side.
It's really a beautiful moment, actually. It's very touching when she holds him and he snaps out of the Sarek mind for a moment and comes back into his own mind. And he's just like, Beverly, it's so difficult. And she's like, you know, Jean-Luc, just experience it. Like, that's
Right,
okay.
they're on
Yeah.
first name basis. That
Yeah.
they're using first names at that point.
Mhm.
No ranks. It's just two human beings, and you know, it's a small part. She barely says anything, but it speaks volumes of the relationship that Crusher and Picard have. I mean, that she's the one that's there. I don't think it's just because she's the doctor.
I mean, it helps that she's the
It
doctor.
helps, but I think it's also that it's Beverly.
It was an appropriate choice because it could. There is I can see a scenario where Counselor Troy is in that seat. You know,
But they don't have that relationship.
right. So yeah, it's a very fitting choice to do that.
Right. That's the thing is that, yeah, it's absolutely true. It could have been Troy, but it's not. It has to be Crusher. So yeah, I think Picard. I think Patrick Stewart did a really rose to the occasion.
The two actors do an interesting kind of, and I don't know if it's you know, I don't know how to describe it, but all I could sense was that Mark Leonard was playing Patrick Stewart's Picard at times, especially just refer the way he's number one, you know, number one in Riker. And then also, I love also that, like, Mark Leonard, again, I know Patrick Stewart was amazing too, because he does the same thing where he adopts the Sarek performance, if you will, and he does a good job of adopting that as well. But what I like is that, you know, you do see him totally come back to being Sarek as we knew him in the original series and in the films. Like in that, at the end scene when he's about to go into the negotiations with the Lagarens, he's just completely Sarek of Vulcan as we've always known him. And I love that Mark Leonard can just pull that off, like, so
Snap into it.
Yeah, just snap into it. It's just like very well done.
Yeah.
And then again, with like, you don't expect Picard, and like when he cries, like those look like, I don't know how they did that, if it was rigged or if Patrick Stewart is able to cry on command, but those are like,
oh, of course he can. He's an actor.
Those are like epic tears. They're like it's a beautifully filmed scene also with in the darkness there, and it it seems like we're seeing something on a different level for Patrick Stewart as well. Like I feel like there was definitely like something new for him as a performer here, because it's such a bizarre thing to think about too, is like to have the mind of another person temporarily living inside of your own mind. It's like, how do you translate that into something that's convincing? And they both, Stewart sells it beautifully. It's wonderfully wonderfully executed.
You know, interesting to note is, you just said, Sarek sort of, is warning Picard about the mind meld. But, the mind meld is sort of it's very cavalierly used in the original show, and like you just said, in the movie. I
must have your thoughts.
Right. But with Next Generation, we sort of see the establishment of the idea that the mind meld is not something you just casually do. And on Enterprise, there's actually an ongoing storyline where it's, and of course, Enterprise being set before all this, where Vulcans are actually shun people who engage in mind melds, and there's actually a disease, there's a neurological condition that comes about from mind melds, and T'Pol gets it, and
Wow.
the Vulcans have no. They don't want to. They don't do research on it because they feel that that's done by unclean people, and
Oh.
and Phlox has to sort of like convince. Well, I know this doctor who he's doing research on it. Do you have any research? But he doesn't want to admit that it's for T'Pol because then she would be taken off the ship.
Should be shamed, right?
She'd be shamed, and it's so it's interesting to see that it's considered to be kind of taboo in the time of Enterprise, but then by the time we get to Kirk and company, Spock's doing it left and right. But I mean, is that because, again, is it because it's something he learned from Sarek, and Sarek is such a rebel himself? Because obviously Sarek is quite a rebel in his own way with Vulcans, among Vulcans. I mean,
I think that's fascinating. I don't recall that, that's a neat little thing that Enterprise does, and I like it actually because mind melds do seem like they're serious things. But yeah,
especially after Star Trek 6.
Oh God! But
the double-handed mind meld. I'll never forget that. I'm like, what the fuck?
It is fascinating, but I do see why. I like the idea that because of their positions, T'Pol, Spock, and Sarek have to use mind melds more often than a Vulcan probably would. I mean, like, it's so integral to the Horta story that Spock mind melds with the Horta in that scene. That's one of the ones I remember being really intense, like, where he like feels the emotions and like things like that. But there have to be repercussions. Like you said, now that you don't think that part of Kirk is in fact transferred, but I would argue, because there's a bit of mysticism in the mind meld as well, and I would argue that while I don't think that the mind of Kirk went into Sarek, certainly certain memories of Kirk's are now a part of Sarek, and those are now a part of Picard. And that's what I meant by Picard gets an upgrade. I mean, like what I mean? It's like you're already
gets an upgrade.
He does. It's kind of like, oh wow, why do I have this strange memory of this tactical response that I never participated in? I can only imagine it enhances him as a captain to have a little bit of Kirk. We can all use a little bit of Kirk.
So in Generations, Picard is able to help him cook because he remembers that.
Exactly. Yep. That's the beauty of it. It happens again. Anyway, we're going to the book. Yay!
Going to the book. What?
Oh no, we had another what moment?
After being written out of yesterday's Enterprise, Mark Leonard here reprises the role he first played in 1967's Journey to Babel. He was in yesterday. He was going to be in yesterday's Enterprise?
I didn't know that. Tell us more.
Wow, I didn't know that. His appearance is the first major unifying event tying together the old and new Trek eras since McCoy's cameo in Farpoint. According to Michael Pillow, the original story concerned the mental problems of an ambassador other than Sarek. From there, the writing staff moved to the problems of the aging, then added the Vulcan loss of control and the telepathic bleeding. Using Sarek was the last logical step in maximizing the audience involvement and impact. Yeah, it talks about, it's a brilliant portrayal. He praises Mark Leonard. He said, interestingly enough, though Sarek's famous son Spock is later seen to be very much alive, Bear recalled a battle at the time just to mention the character at all,
Wow.
with caution still in place about dealing with the original series. Picard says he attended the wedding of Sarek's son as a lieutenant, though again Spock is not specified. So they were so wary of mentioning anything of the old show.
Right,
They
because
didn't even want to.
they
Yeah,
hadn't resolved what happens to Spock yet. Star Trek 6 wasn't even out. I don't even know if Star Trek 5 was out at this point. But that makes complete sense. It's like the original guard is saying, don't touch. Next gen,
right.
don't touch. Interesting challenge. But Spock is mentioned in the scene where Captain Picard is processing Sarek's emotions. Remember, he mentions that he mentions Amanda and he mentions Spock. It's just one mention, and then he says, "I really did love, or do love you," which is a very poignant moment.
Very,
Gene,
yeah.
Gene Roddenberry. That reminds me, and I think I read this also in, I don't know if it's in the companion, but it's on Memory Alpha. But they kind of it kind of was a little bit of a parallel to Gene Roddenberry himself losing his faculties, and his health was starting to diminish, and so it was kind of poignant in some ways for the people working on Star Trek to do this episode, because it hit close to home.
They all thought, this is Gene.
In a way, yeah, it's true.
Right.
So that's an interesting, like, personal note there, or inside note, I guess it would be, that I thought was pretty cool.
Right. No, absolutely. That's a good point. Gene Roddenberry, I guess, was already he was already in I think in failing health at this point. So there were definitely parallels there, for sure.
Well, that's cool. I think. What do you think? Is it time to give our episode ranking for this? Rating, not ranking.
Yes.
We don't rank. We're rating.
This is a
easy 10.
Is an easy 10.
Boom.
Yeah. It's interesting to give a 10 to an episode that is so. It's not a fun episode,
right?
It's not an episode that has any doesn't have battles or anything. It's not. It's just that I think as fans, I think all Trek fans, most Trek fans who grew up with the original show would have some strong emotional connection to this episode, and it's sort of a turning point, really, for next generation to finally, make the connection, like a really strong connection to the old show. It's kind of like when trying to think of like when Doctor Who. Oh, when Doctor Who, they finally had that notebook that had all the drawings of the previous Doctors in it, and they're like, "Oh my God, okay, Doctor Who, those two shows do connect." So
Doctor Who and Star Trek are kind of in an interesting situation, I think. You touched on fandom for a second there, and both of these shows have been around for a very long time, and I wonder now, because online, I try to stay away from it, but it's pretty hard to when you're online right now these days, when you explore the Star Trek Discovery hashtag and things like that, and there seems to be a lot of friction. There's some groups of folks that say if you don't that they're already rejecting Star Trek Discovery, and I can see why, because like part of me is rejecting Star Trek Discovery based on the things we've seen so far, and like the implications of certain things.
Well, but you gotta watch it though to truly...
No, I totally agree. I'm not in that camp at all. I'm not like
okay, all right.
I'm not in that camp at all. I'm 100% in agreement with you, and I'll probably end up liking it, like knowing me personally. But we'll see. I'm still holding out. But there's this kind of like anger, I think, where there's a lot of bullying going on online, and it just doesn't seem very, to me, it's like if you're a Star Trek fan, there's like a bigger thing above even.
Who's bullying who? What do you mean?
Just like a lot of people on the internet, there's a lot of this like, oh, you're not a real fan. because you're this, or you're not a real fan because you like this, or you're not, like these kinds of like accusations. It's like
that's been happening forever.
Has it?
There were people who, when Next Generation came out, they're like, "Oh, you're not a real fan if you don't watch Next Generation." And then there were people who didn't want to watch Next Generation. I mean, there were members, there were actors from the original show who actively were encouraging fans not to watch Next Generation.
Oh, I didn't realize that. No,
yeah,
I don't remember
in
that.
the convention circuit. Yeah, people were like, "Don't watch that."
Wow.
Because I think they were seeing it as they felt. Of course, they felt.
Mm-hmm.
They felt like they were getting the rug pulled out from them, because it's like, for all like as we said with our last movie thing, Star Trek 4 was the last time that Kirk and crew were Star Trek, just in and of themselves. All of a sudden, after Star Trek 4, you've got Next Generation, and they're huge, and they probably had a ton of fans that were not fans of the original, just as there's fans. Apparently, there are people who watch the new movies and don't watch the original show, or any of the original shows for that matter. So that's just natural. That's just the way it is. Doctor Who's always been that way too.
It makes sense. There's both shows also, since I was comparing the two shows, both shows do have several entry points
right,
for people.
Exactly.
So that makes sense too. Star Trek has, a few entry points as well. Quite a few, actually. I know folks that are curious about other Trek, but like many, I happen to have a few friends who really adore Star Trek Voyager and don't know much more about Star Trek beyond Star Trek Voyager. So it is true. There are different kind of subcultures, if you will, among the thing.
I think the key is, like you said, there's lots of entry points, but are the entry points backwards compatible to what's already gone on before? And I personally believe that's what's critical. I think that's what's important. And oftentimes, entry points, as you said, are made that are not backwards compatible. You can't say, okay, like Voyager. It's very easy to watch Voyager and then watch Next Generation. They're stylistically, everything. They go well together. The original show, you're starting to make a stretch there, but you still can see the basic elements going from Voyager to the original show. Now, here's my question is, are we going to watch Discovery, which is obviously a new entry point? Is that going to be backwards compatible to Voyager, DS9, Next Generation, the original show, the movies? I don't know. We have to see.
Enterprise seemed to pull it off.
Enterprise pulled it off very well, but Enterprise was a continuation of the same machinery. It was the same production crews. It was the same, it was pretty much the same people. It was the same house style making those shows. Obviously, with Discovery, it's a whole new, from scratch. I mean, there's Nicholas Meyer. Maybe that. I mean, I don't know. We got to see. I'm going to watch that show. I'm just obviously first as a science fiction show, and do I like it or do I not? But secondly, how does it fit into Star Trek? Because from what I've seen so far, it doesn't readily fit into Star Trek. It's sort of like, it's how I approach Doctor Who now. So, I can watch Doctor Who. I don't necessarily think of it
as Doctor Who shirt. Go on.
Right. I mean, I think of it as the time traveler, right? But sometimes I think, well, does it fit into Doctor Who or does it not? And that's how my appreciation of it is filtered through. Is how well does it connect with what's already happened? So we'll see.
The more I struggle with the sort of like idea that like the original series, which I hold sacred, is about to be like completely like ignored or negated, I realized that it's kind of an irrational struggle because you've made me realize that like yeah I haven't even seen this thing and I'm just kind of worried is what it is. And you know, maybe my worries are unsubstantiated, or maybe I was in the throes of Ponfar and had a vision of Star Trek Discovery, and it wasn't. It was a Romulan trick. But but anyway,
Yeah, right.
I am excited. I can't wait till we get there. That's a really good point. Yeah, so it might actually Discovery might prove to be beyond an entry point, but an actual retelling as well. It might be a brand new take on Star Trek. Now, one last question, because this is something I think about deeply.
Mm-hmm.
We have to also remember that this is not. So, if you think about it, Star Trek, there's only a few shows that are like following the story of the Enterprise, and that's Enterprise, the original series, Star Trek: The Next Generation. That's it. Those are our three. That's like the pillar or the spine of the series, if you will. Yeah, I guess Enterprise does get that distinction.
Well, yeah,
it's an Enterprise story.
right.
So otherwise, we have a Voyager story. We have a Deep Space Nine, story. These are all expansions, and Discovery is trying to do the same thing. It's not trying to be a Star Trek like an Enterprise story. So this is definitely like an ancillary thing in my mind because it's about the Discovery. It's a whole new thing. I think that's a good way for me to like look at it and remind myself not to get too worried about what the show's gonna look like or feel like or anything like that, because it's not. At the end of the day, what I consider to be sacred is the Enterprise stories. You can only go forward or retell it like you did in Kelvin. Like you can't do much.
Interesting.
You can't do much harm to that story.
Interesting.
Something else. Something
you're putting another layer now on what's canon. If it's not on the Enterprise, it's not really canon.
No, I don't know if I'm going that far. I don't know if I'm going that far, but I'm saying I can now be selective about what discover. I can be a little selective here. Have a selective memory or a selective loyalty, if you will. Anyways, that's all I've got to say about that. Anything else, Doctor?
You realize that episode, when we do our review, our conversation of that first Discovery episode, it's going to be like 3 or 4 hours.
No, we got to keep it.
We just spoke for an hour, and I don't have my glasses on, but I think it's an hour and 18 minutes about Sarek.
We've got to try to keep our discussions to about relatively an hour. I mean, it's special. We might go 2 hours for that. We'll see.
My prediction is going to be 3 hours.
No, that's...
And 22 minutes.
Wow. My prediction is an hour and 30.
Unless it's absolutely no. Even if it's terrible, it's going to be 3 hours.
It's a 3 hour discussion.
It's a 3 hour discussion.
The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was lost. If not for the spirit of their fearless crew, the minnow would be lost. The minnow would be lost. What if Star Trek Discovery is Gilligan's Island in space? I would really have loved that. Anyways, on that note, Doctor, live long and prosper. Peace and long life.
Peace and long life, sir.